Hello, everyone. My name is John Lustrea. I'm the Education Coordinator at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And today with me, I have Nathan Marzoli. He's a staff historian for the Air Force National Guard.
Air National Guard, right.
Okay, the Air National Guard. Good, I want to make sure I got that right. Thanks for joining us today, Nathan.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
And thank you to all of you tuning in and watching the video. It's been a thrill. One of the kind of bright spots amid this whole COVID-19 pandemic has been getting to see people regularly tuning in to the videos that we've been making, and it's really delightful to be able to kind of connect with people in this way. So thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed these videos, since of course the museum's doors are closed, if you'd consider making a donation or becoming a member. It really helps support video content and scholarship like this that we're trying to bring to you all on a regular basis. So if you enjoy these, please consider supporting the museum in that way. Or if you're not at a point where you can give financially, even just liking our Facebook page or subscribing to our YouTube channel means the world to us. And share this video, help spread the word and get more eyes on our videos and things. And our Facebook page, our YouTube channel are where you'll see videos like this, and as well as on our website, civilwarmed.org. So check all those places out, and those are some of the ways that you can help support the museum while our doors are closed during this pandemic. And speaking of our website, keep tabs on our blog, which is what brings our good friend Nathan here to us today. He's an esteemed, critically acclaimed blog author for us. He's written a number of things for us. Today we're going to be talking about his post entitled Fraud and Deception, Challenges for Enrollment Board Surgeons. One of my favorite pieces that we put up on there. It sort of boggles the mind, some of the things that we're going to cover today. So to start things off, Nathan, tell us a little bit about about yourself and what inspired you to write about this topic in particular.
Mm-hmm. So I graduated from with my master's from University of New Hampshire with a master's in history and museum studies. So I have kind of a public history background, but I ended up, my first job, I moved to DC, actually working for the U.S. Army Center of Military History. So that wasn't so much, kind of haven't been in the public history realm so much since then, since I've changed jobs and now with the Air National Guard History Office. But that gave me an opportunity to write more about the Civil War, because that had always been kind of one of my huge interests in grad school.
And I think you had access to a lot of sources at your previous job, right?
Right. Yeah, I did. It was nice, both at CMH and other Army research facilities like the Army History, Army Heritage and Education Center, which is up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Although that's open to the public, but they have a lot of good Civil War collections. But yeah, I was able to do a lot of research with the Civil War, and I've done a bunch of different things. But for the last few years, really, I've really been heavily focused on the Enrollment Act of 1863, which was the first federal conscription, nationwide conscription in U.S. history. And I've also focused a lot on the interaction between federal officials of the draft and their interactions with soldiers, and also just citizens, Union citizens, or American citizens living in the Union States at the time. So that's what kind of drove me to write this post. It was just some things that I'd found when I was doing research that were about the draft and about the draft process that I thought were very interesting, to say the least.
Yes, no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's go ahead and get right into it. Give kind of a little overview about the Enrollment Act, the draft, when it was passed, who it impacted, all that good stuff.
So I'll just do it in kind of a quick nutshell here, a few minutes. But so really at the end of 1862, early 1863, the volunteerism that had really filled up the Union armies up until that point had really dried up. And a lot of this was just people were getting tired of the war. All the men that had volunteered for whatever reason, whether that be patriotism, money, monetary reasons, what have you, they had done it and were already in the army. And then, of course, there were really the setbacks that the Union war effort experienced at the winter of 1862 to 63, especially Fredericksburg, and then in the east in Burnside's Mud March in January, and the morale was really bad in the country, and throughout the armies. There was a lot of desertion going on, so guys just didn't want to join the army anymore. So this was what drove Congress and President Lincoln, Congress to pass and President Lincoln to sign the Enrollment Act, which was passed in March 1863. And it was as I said, the first nationwide conscription act in U.S. history. It required the enrollment of all male citizens between the ages of 20 to 45. So this involved actually going out and getting the, like I said, or enrolling, so getting the names and ages and addresses of basically every male between that age, which in and of itself was an incredible challenge, but that can be a whole other topic. And then after you would enroll these guys, you would hold a draft to potentially draft male citizens into Army service. So the draft itself was kind of interesting. Like I said, it was the first nationwide conscription, but really it was more designed to stimulate volunteering than actually get draftees into the Army. So I think it was James McPherson in Battle Cry of Freedom that called the draft, the Enrollment Act, actually a clumsy carrot and stick device, which was designed to stimulate volunteering. And this was because the act itself, although it was a draft, it actually provided for a lot of exemptions. So if your name actually was pulled in the draft, there were kind of three different ways you could be exempt from the draft. So the first was commutation, which was essentially the Lincoln administration set it at $300. So you could pay $300 and then you wouldn't have to serve out that draft term. So you would be exempt from that draft call. Right, so you could basically buy your way out. And there was a lot of fuss about it at the time, and still historians kind of debate commutation today. But the Lincoln administration actually set it at $300 because they felt that it would keep the price of substitutes down, which is actually the second form of exemption, which is basically that a man could buy a substitute, so physically another person, and that person would have to be someone that wasn't of the draft age or eligible for the draft. So basically 18 to 19-year-olds, and also recent immigrants who weren't eligible for the draft and enrollment. They would pay them to take their place in the Army. So the benefit of substitution is that you were essentially free from getting drafted again for the rest of the war, essentially the rest of the term of that substitute. Whereas commutation, you only escape that draft. So if your name came up again, you would potentially have to either be held to service or get a substitute or pay the $300. So this worked out. Oh, excuse me. And then the last substitution was medical exemptions, which is what's going to bring us to kind of the topic of this talk and what the blog post was about. But it worked out that out of the total number of men drafted, 3/5 of those were exempted for one of those three reasons, and that number, the remaining 2/5 was about 207,000 men, and out of that number, only 46,000 actually served. So you can see that it really wasn't effective, at least at conscripting men into the Army. It did get a lot more men to volunteer or be substitutes, paid substitutes to join the Army. But it didn't draft a whole lot of guys. So bringing us back to the medical aspect of it. So the law also, the Enrollment Act also divided the United States into draft districts. And this was just they would Each district was just a congressional district at the time. And each district had an enrollment board, which was made up of 3 different men. And the board was designed to basically not only administer the draft within their district, but also kind of control what was going on in the draft. So the 3 men was the provost marshal, the commissioner of the enrollment board, and then once again the surgeon. And it was the job of these enrollment board surgeons to kind of examine men as they came up, either as they were drafted or came in as volunteers or substitutes, to examine them and determine that their medical eligibility for Army service. So that was the role of the enrollment board surgeons.
Mm-hmm. And that is a task that surgeons have been performing throughout the conflict, but of course, they're giving them a physical basically. With volunteers, it's a little bit different, because their motivation is different than someone that gets drafted. If you volunteer, you presumably want to be in the Army. If you get drafted, maybe you're not opposed to serving in the Army, but it wasn't necessarily your choice. So you have to deal with some different motivations. Right. So surgeons have been doing this sort of thing, but now this is kind of a different animal. So as you talk about in the blog post, these enrollment board surgeons, they face a certain number of challenges in kind of determining someone's medical eligibility. Talk about some of the situations they encountered, from the pretty mundane to the extraordinarily outlandish.
Yeah, so so there were basically like 2 kinds of men that were trying to, or 2 kinds of men that were examined that would be trying to avoid service. Or let me put it this way: 2 kinds of men that were coming in that the surgeons kind of classified their examinations into. So first you had the volunteers. So the draft, because it was designed to stimulate volunteering, the federal government and also states have been doing bounties, paying large bounties to soldiers since really the beginning of the war. But the federal government was also instituting large bounties as well at this point, just to try and get men into the Army, dangle money in front of their face and say, come on in, it'll be fine. And this brought guys, obviously, because of the allure of so much money, a lot of guys would try and come into the Army that weren't necessarily eligible for Army service. So this would either be men that were too young, below 18, or men that were way too old, above 45, in their 50s, 60s, or people that had ailments that prevented them from being sent into the Army, but they wanted to kind of mask those to be able to go into service, or at least collect the bounty and then, maybe abscond with it. So you have the guys that were the older guys that were trying to get in, and they would do tricks like shave their beards to look younger, dye their hair. In fact, if you look at newspapers at the time, there's a lot of ads for like hair dyes and hair coloring and stuff like that.
Oh, interesting.
1964. Yeah, I've seen that in different newspapers. So you can see how it kind of turned into a big business with trying to get guys to make them look younger so they could volunteer. Of course, young men just kind of had to act older. I don't know how you did that. Maybe puff out your chest or stand up straight. I don't know. But the surgeons,
and you have to imagine, especially with the younger guys, that some of the surgeons are like, oh, we got one of those coming. Like I have to imagine some of them, they probably could just see from a mile away.
Yeah, I read some reports where it was like, the old and the young are easy to pick out. It's like, well, that's, we can tell that you're too old or something like that. And then, of course, there were, as I was saying, the infirm guys that had disabilities, and they would try and hide them so they could try and get in and get the money, and then who knows what they would do after that. But some examples, like guys that would have hernia, as I said, they would like ice it for a long time after or before the examination, so it would be the swelling would go down, and potentially the surgeon wouldn't notice. Another one was they would get false teeth made out of vulcanized rubber and they said it would look pretty, as long as they would mask it with like tobacco, a quid of tobacco, it would, the teeth would look normal, because of course they're not white because they're made of rubber, but the gums look fairly normal, so you just mask it with tobacco.
Wait, so people are going into these exams just like with some chewing tobacco in, and like
yeah,
no one's concerned about that?
right, I guess it's common enough at that point that it's like, well, it's just a normal thing. But then there was also guys would get really drunk before an examination, especially ones that were, quote unquote lame, had some sort of injury where they couldn't move too well. So hopefully being drunk would make them forget about it, and they could be a little more spry and nimble and seem younger. And in the most extreme cases, they would actually get guys that were really old, sick, whatever, would get just like a ringer to go in for them and get a guy off the street that was able, and then he'd go in under the assumed name, and then they would just switch afterwards, so the guy could get the money, go in and get the money.
Yes, the age before ID.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Which plays a pretty significant role in this story, like just the inability to totally confirm that person A is indeed person A.
Right, yeah, it was a real skill. I mean, yeah, you had to learn things, the surgeons, as they went along. So anyways, that's all the volunteers, the guys that want to get the money, so they want to go into the service, so they're exaggerating things or basically trying to hide things so they can get in. So on the other end of it, you have guys that are drafted or substitutes and don't want to go into the Army. So on the flip side, they're actually either playing up ailments that they have or deliberately injuring themselves to make themselves unfit for service. So some of them, the more benign ones, was like, I think one surgeon said, a guy would point to a scar on his shoulder or something and say, oh, this has made me lame my entire life, when it's probably just a minor cut he had, 30 years ago or something or whatever. Or guys that would, complain of chronic heart problems. One of them, one surgeon said that they would like run around or, do calisthenics to get their heart pumping, racing before the examination so they could act like they had a problem, or like someone would pretend or exaggerate their varicose veins in their legs, so they would like tie a belt or something around their leg to get their veins to swell before the examination, things like that. And then you had the guys that were, like I said, deliberately injuring themselves, which is, some of the things that you read in the reports are just absurd, like you were saying. One I saw was like cayenne pepper in someone's eyes to make himself look like he has conjunctivitis.
Oh my goodness.
It would put like oils and irritants on your skin to simulate a rash. The one I think I opened up the blog post with was this guy in Minnesota that apparently soaked his feet in hot lye for like 10 days or something, to like completely make his skin raw on his feet to show that he had some sort of condition. And then in the most extreme cases, they would actually like cut off limbs, like fingers, toes, something like that. And
there's a great image in the blog post to that effect, which
right.
comes from Library of Congress. But go check it out and look at the image. There's a guy, he had cut off, I think, a finger or something. It's sort of a satirical cartoon.
Yeah, but it's things like that. And the kind of funny thing about it is that these men were trying to avoid service, and even though the surgeons would kind of detect that they had injured themselves to avoid service, sometimes they hurt themselves to the point where they actually became exempt from service. So the surgeons had no choice to give them an exemption anyway. So the surgeon reports, which I'll add, are actually available. They're all compiled after the war into a book, and they're available as PDF. I don't know if Google Books has it, but places like that, archive.org, that sort of thing. So if you ever want to peruse them, they're available for free.
What's the title on that?
I do not remember. It's some long title. I'd have to pull it up, but it's like compiled surgeons reports or something.
Yeah, maybe
Something like
send that
that.
to me, and then we'll post that in the comments when we
Yeah,
premiere the video, just so people can check it out if they want.
yeah, we'll have to do that. Yeah, sorry, I don't remember the exact title of it. Actually, maybe hold on, I might have it open. No, I don't. I'll get it back. I'll get it to you later.
Okay. So how common, I mean, so obviously, the draft only actually gets, I think you said like 40 something thousand men into the service. So clearly a lot of people are being ruled exempt. How
Mhm.
common were these attempts? What was it, something that was, pretty common, or is it like, well, I don't know. Yeah. How common was this?
Oh yeah, I mean it was ridiculous. It was like a whole other business, and you have uh, going through these surgeons reports from the districts, and it's like they're saying the same thing, a lot of them. So they clearly were having the same experience the throughout the U.S. And so it just happened all the time, to the point that one surgeon I read wrote that basically when you do an examination, you just believe you start at believing nothing that he says, and that's like the only foolproof way of uh, of not getting tricked.
Hmm.
Because these guys are like learning by the fly. They don't have modern testing or anything like that, so that it just becomes a judgment call. So I mean, you have to wonder if a lot of guys got put into the service because the doctor thought they were faking, when in reality they actually weren't.
Hmm.
I'm sure that happened in a lot of cases. But.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. This whole subject brings up something that I think we don't often think about in terms of the relationship between surgeons and their patients in the Civil War. We think of the surgeons as, this probably isn't the right term, but like the good guys. They're trying to help, they're trying to heal, they're trying to do all this.
Mm,
But in some ways, either the soldiers or the prospective soldiers, the surgeons have this incredible degree of power over whether or not they're going to go into the service or not. And
right.
so there's kind of this weird power dynamic that's there, that I don't think we focus a lot on. And this particular story really brings that out.
Mm,
And you can see examples of this, like, you know, in the ranks as well, like with the morning sick call, like shortly before a battle. If someone's really sick, but the doctor's looking at them like, are you really sick, or is this an example of what they would call malingering? Uh,
mm-hmm.
there's this degree of power that the doctor has over the soldier to make him go into battle or allow him to stay behind the lines. And I don't think most exercised that maliciously, although perhaps some did. Um,
Well, yeah, that's part of the problem, and this is just one aspect of the draft law. But it was the system itself was really open for corruption, and it was rife with corruption, although it mostly worked. Uh, but on the other end of this, you had the potential for corruption with these enrollment board surgeons. But then you also, I read that these surgeons were complaining about other like local doctors that, and friends, family, whatever, that would basically lie and write notes, saying that this guy has this condition, or this guy, it's fine, whatever, when he really wasn't. So there's that potential for like local community doctors that are corrupt and have some other ulterior motive to help out someone. So
mhm.
too.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's a very kind of different aspect of Civil War medicine that I think often doesn't come to mind.
Right.
So okay, so it was very common. Did the surgeons kind of develop tricks and things that they kind of started picking up on things to kind of catch people in this?
Yeah, they did, and this just kind of came with experience because they were examining, I think, up to around 100 guys a day,
Mm,
and they eventually whittled it down to, remarkably, a lot of the surgeons said we could only, I think the most efficient was like 50 to 60 examinations per day. So they learned quickly, but some of the tricks that I found interesting was, I think this was the Massachusetts 4th District. And this was related to deafness. So a guy would come in, and if he complained of being deaf and the surgeon said, or the surgeon suspected of lying or exaggerating, he basically would, he'd be examining the guy, and then he would say, kind of under his breath, really quietly, he said, well, you know, too bad this guy didn't say anything about his knee problems, because I'd surely have to exempt him from service if he said something about that. And then, of course, he would say, if the draftee would say, well, yeah, my knees are horrible. Of course, the draftee trying to get out of service, then he would kind of catch him red-handed and be like, well, your hearing's actually not so bad after all. Mm-hmm. And then the other one I saw was the surgeon would hold a watch to his ear, and so he would kind of get him to focus on the ticking of the watch, and as the man was listening to the watch, he would start like moving away. The surgeon would start moving away slowly and speaking kind of at the same level or lowering his voice. So the idea was that if he could still hear him as he moved away, it was because he had been focusing on the watch, so that he was kind of tricked into not remembering that he had complained about hearing loss or something like that.
Fascinating. It's almost a little bit like sleight of hand, like there's some magician stuff going on.
Right, yeah. Yeah, they kind of have to come up with these really creative ways to trick people into getting out of their lies, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Or kind of like a game of poker almost.
Right. Yeah, and the other kind of trick that I thought was interesting was for blindness, because I think deafness and blindness, they were two of the most common, because they were, well, you didn't really have to do it. You didn't have to hurt yourself to do it. And it was hard for a surgeon to disprove that you were deaf or blind. Most men could probably pull that trick for a long time. With the blindness, if they would complain of blindness in one eye, one surgeon would say that he would like move off to the side of that eye, the other side of the eye they said was blind. And he would say, in kind of a sharp tone, suddenly, unexpectedly, would kind of say, like, look here. And supposedly, the eye would, if he was actually blind, the eye wouldn't move. And, if he was actually had perfect vision, his eye would kind of snap attention to the surgeon without him controlling it. So mm-hmm. Those were some of the tricks that I saw. But yeah, it was just took a lot of experience for these guys to develop these things. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it was an interesting job. I'm sure, I wish I could have gotten the full tales of some of these surgeons.
Yeah, you talk about never a dull day on the job.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Although I'm sure after a certain time you see kind of the same things over and over, because guys, I'm sure the word is spreading, and it's like, mm-hmm. People come up with the same tricks over and over after a certain amount of time, because someone says, hey, I know this worked or this didn't work. Just kind of spread throughout the community.
Yeah, one of the things that's sort of interesting to me about this, it reminds me, I wrote a blog post at the museum. One of the things we have in our collection are a series of reports by, and I hope I can remember what it's called. It's like the board to not dismiss, the board to retire disabled officers or something. Mm-hmm. These are mostly kind of lower grade line officers in the regular Army that were sent to this, bureaucratic board that's set up in like Wilmington, Delaware, or something like that. Which weirdly enough was chaired by Irvin McDowell, who of first Bull Run infamy. Like, you're not any good as a general. Go head this surgical board. And they would interview these lieutenants and majors and things like this, and be like, so why do you think you're no longer fit to serve? And the doctors are examining them, and what's so fascinating to me is that the doctors examining them are entirely reliant on the patient's case history. Like nowadays, we have medical records, and they're getting there in the 19th century, but nowadays there's detailed medical records, all the vaccines you've had, when you've had them, if you've had surgery, when you had surgery, all this kind of stuff. Like it kind of exists. And the kind of verbal patient history is still important today, but that's all they have to go on in the 19th century. And so much of being a doctor is just kind of comes down to whether or not you believe what the person is saying about
Right.
their condition, which is, again, I mean, when you think about battlefield injuries, like it's pretty obvious if you've been shot or not. But with sickness and other things like this, it's a little bit more of a gray area, and I think that's an interesting aspect of Civil War medicine that it doesn't
Hmm.
quite get enough play, and that I think this also really brings to the forefront.
Yeah, it was all up to their judgment.
That's right. Um, let's see here. So we've been through some of the accounts, and we'll post the compiled reports in the comments section. Um, so if someone was a substitute, would they have to be examined as well to be
Hmm.
medically fit?
Right. Yeah, everyone coming in had to have a medical examination.
Gotcha. Now, as the war starts coming to a close, are they seeing fewer examples because maybe they're concerned, they're not as concerned that the war will be as dangerous like in 1865? Do you have a sense if there are fewer instances of this?
I'm not sure. I can't remember if it tailed off or not. I mean, it definitely tailed off with the corresponding draft calls because there were the different draft calls since the law was passed. Um, but I don't know if the I don't know if the guys that were trying to get out of it, then that number kind of dropped down. I don't remember reading that or not.
Yeah, I guess what that question kind of gets to is, do you have a sense for what their motivation was for getting out? I think there's a variety of likely ones we can think of, but
Yeah, I mean, the war had been dragged. Like, first off, what I said, the guys that wanted to volunteer did. So by 1863, although of course, there were guys still volunteering that wanted to, and individual motivations run the gamut. They're across the board. Even though numerous studies have been done to try and figure out what generic, large scale patterns of motivation were. It's hard to tell, and it varies from guy to guy. But a lot of the guys that had wanted to volunteer had. So soldier or men at this time, well, either didn't want to do the army because they didn't think the life in the service was for them. They may have already had a good paying job at work. They didn't want to lose, that's the most obvious one, is they didn't want to lose their life or limb, get injured during the war, or maybe just they were opposed to the war effort in general. I think you see that a lot with people where just the civil liberties aspect of it, especially people with the Democratic Party and Democratic Party affiliation people leaning towards the Democratic side, just didn't agree with Lincoln's war, especially once emancipation happened, and they didn't want their own civil liberties infringed by being forced into the army when they didn't have to.
mm,
So, if I were to pick one that I've seen is probably the most, is probably the civil liberties aspect of it. That you can't force me to do this. I don't want to do it. That'd probably be one. Or
right. The federal government, is in the process of becoming larger as a result of the Civil War. But if you're a farmer in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, uh,
Mhm.
very rural Pennsylvania, you probably don't have a lot of interaction with the federal government, and suddenly here comes someone saying you got to fight in the army. I imagine that actually probably would have been a pretty jarring experience.
Yeah, it's funny that you picked Pennsylvania because uh, uh, kind of like central Pennsylvania was one of the worst resistance areas to the draft.
Oh,
Yeah, Clearfield County in particular, they had to send the 16th Regiment Veteran Reserve Corps there in the winter of 1864 to 65, and they actually did a kind of a campaign, so to speak, in the mountains and lumber country of central Pennsylvania, and kind of trying to root out deserters to where there was actually a kind of a pitched skirmish, I want to say, where a bunch of draft resistors were holed up in a house, and these soldiers of the 16th VRC actually opened fire on the house and killed a couple guys. And one of the Union soldiers, was actually killed.
oh my
Uh,
goodness.
So yeah. Anyways, one of the biggest places, thorns in the sides for outright draft resistance. Anyways, that actually evolved into armed conflict.
Wow. That's wild. And of
Mm.
course, no disrespect to our many Pennsylvania viewers that we have watching. I know I've seen a lot of people tuning in from Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah. It was years ago. It's all right now.
That's right. Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about this kind of
Thank you,
odd and
Brad.
interesting little slice of Civil War medicine. Thanks for writing about it for us.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure.
And thank you everyone for tuning in as always. If you enjoyed this and you enjoyed our other videos, please consider donating to the museum, becoming a member, especially during this time while our doors are closed. It really lets us bring programming like this to you on a regular basis. And if you're at a place where you can't do that, even just liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, that's the best way to stay up to date on exciting new content like this. And we'll see you in the next video. This is John and Nathan signing off.